Good afternoon, everybody, to this parallel session on climate. As you can see, I'm not Gelsomina. Unfortunately, Gelsomina is ill, so I offered a volunteer to replace her last minute. But she sends you her regards, and she was also eager to see how infrastructures can contribute to the landscape analysis, by the way, so I will be referring to that later on. So the parallel sessions for this stakeholder forum are organized as follows. They're split into two parts. In the first part, we will have a general discussion with a panel, and in the second part, we will have a discussion organized around two tables, in our case, chaired by two other colleagues. The objective of this parallel session is to deepen our understanding on stakeholder involvement in the specific domain. So in this case, climate, which is, of course, by definition, rather vast, but we will try. And we want to see a little bit what we discussed this morning, which are the objectives and the scope of stakeholder involvement in research infrastructures, and ESFRI as well, but also maybe we can already address some methodological aspects which we'll then see in the final session chaired by David at the end of the day. We have selected two European initiatives just to stimulate the discussion. One is the climate mission, and the other one is linked to the ERA industrial roadmaps for low carbon and circular industries. So we want to see the role of research infrastructures in supporting the implementation of the mission on one side, and in supporting, of course, the delivery of these industrial roadmaps for the technologies of the future. Again, this is just to showcase and to stimulate the discussion. There are many other aspects, so it's not the... also, we have for our panel the speakers that you can see around me. So first of all, we have two speakers from the Commission to represent the two initiatives. So we have Johannes Klumpers in his capacity as head of the Secretariat for the Climate Adaptation Mission, and also Evgeni from DG RTD, responsible for the preparation of the ERA industrial roadmaps for low carbon and circular. We then have another three speakers coming from research infrastructure. So we have Valerie Thouret on my left from IAGOS and chair of the executive board. We have Fernando Diaz Lopez from the Climate Kick. And we have Rory Fitzgerald from the European Social Survey, ERIC director. So as in the previous panel, we will then invite our speakers to make some introductory statements to address the policy initiatives, but also the possible scope of research infrastructure contribution. We will have a brief exchange, but then we will focus the discussion. We will pass in phase two of this panel, which will be the table discussions, and we will organize the table discussions into two tables, chaired respectively by Johannes and by Evgeni. To deepen the discussion on the mission and on the roadmaps, respectively. Okay, so this is how we will implement this panel, and then I think I will pass directly the floor to our speakers for their to present their positions, and then we will continue from there. So I will follow the sequence. We don't have the slide here. I will follow the sequence that you can see on the program, starting with Valerie Thouret. And I think, Valerie, you have slides, right?
Yes. Where is the... it's always tricky to put on a full screen, sorry. So I will be brief. You see there is basically 4 slides, because I will not comment this one. Thank you for the invitation, by the way. And so I'm very pleased to participate to this session. And definitely I will just define, because climate is a so broad topic that my background and the research infrastructure I'm representing is looking at the climate on the atmospheric composition side. So I think I don't have to convince you that the climate crisis is definitely our key challenge. And especially this year, this summer, we all have seen in our countries, because it was all over the Northern Hemisphere, that this year was a record-breaking year on many aspects of the climate indicators. Heat wave, not only in the atmosphere, but also in the marine, in the Mediterranean, especially droughts, fire, floodings, glacier loss, poor air quality, all these consequences of our atmospheric composition being modified by what we call the climate forcers. And you all know either this WMO table with the climate indicators and the famous IPCC, also variables contributing to warm or cool the atmosphere. And you see a few of the research infrastructure contributing to monitor regularly on a long-term basis these climate indicators or the so-called essential climate variables. So you probably know very well the IAGOS research infrastructure focused on the long-lived greenhouse gases. We have the ACTRIS research infrastructure more focused on reactive gases and aerosols and clouds, and IAGOS, the research infrastructure using commercial aircraft, considering all these essential variables. So it's very important to say that if we want to answer the climate crisis or respond to this challenge, we need an integrated information on all the compartments of our planet, from the environmental science to life science. And that's definitely the definition of our group, the so-called ESFRI community. So you have probably seen this logo representing the compartment of the Earth system with a different compartment. And so maybe I will more focus, well, my background, you have understood, is more on the atmospheric domain, but we are all not independent. In a few words, maybe if I have the time, this is the basic slides we are showing to explain the role of IAGOS in the development of such an integrated global observing strategy. But the comments can adapt to all our research infrastructure for long-term observations. So we need different kind of observation, from ground-based stations to satellites. I focused on you see the little aircraft, it's somewhere between ground-based, well, it's ground-based by definition, but it gives other information throughout the troposphere, which is very important to have the import and export of essential variables for pollution and climate. So we are all dedicated to answer what we have discussed this morning, the IPCC reports, the different assessment, the policy-relevant product. So that's the end, the final goal. But we provide data to data center and services, but we also provide science. We also provide knowledge, and that's the loop in the middle, and ongoing improving loop between the different actors to get the best, as I call, the best Earth system model that will give the answers of all the questions and forecasts for our system. So we are all participating in different European projects that you may know from ESFRI. We have dedicated projects in the European Green Deal that have started about a year ago. ERA Urbans, more dedicated to air quality, but that's the same scientific question. IAGOS Cities, or POL, more dedicated to greenhouse gases, and other international or dedicated projects. Maybe I will skip the details on IAGOS. I may come back if you're interested, but I think the interest or the focus of this session is on the different question, and the question we want to raise I entitled that as to mirror the key challenge of the climate crisis. I entitled that the sustainability challenge, because on our research infrastructure perspective, that's definitely what are our needs and opportunities. It has been said already a little bit this morning, but I really want to emphasize that we really need long-term and highly committed staff, because we are providing long-term and high-quality services. And so far, it's still one of the bottlenecks or difficulties I think we are all facing in our observing research infrastructure. So we need definitely the long-term funded, and not only from the member states or the ERICS or ISBL members, so that's where we need probably an additional contribution from other stakeholders. I mentioned the Copernicus, and especially the Atmosphere Monitoring Service, or the Climate One, the CD3S, because that's our opportunities to work with the Copernicus services, to work with the international Spark for climate, and IGAC more on the chemistry of the atmosphere, that give us a broader community of users and to interconnect our research infrastructure. Because what is very important in our long-term research infrastructure for observation is that we are providing, as I said, long-term time series. And for example, IAGOS is providing already 28 years of uninterrupted time series of ozone and water vapor, and a little bit less for the other variables. But IAGOS has started as a single European project for only 3 years in 1994. You see what we used to call a success story to be the IAGOS today. So this data, it's essential to document the processes. That's what we have been doing for this more than 20 years, to document the processes, the trends, to validate model and satellites. And now we still need to keep going with such a time series to make meaningful decisions. So we need this continuous monitoring to measure and scale the anomalies to attribute to the cause. You will probably remember the different COVID papers that all the research infrastructure have provided to document and scale the heat waves anomaly, so throughout the troposphere or in the different compartments of the Earth system, to assess the impact of mitigation policy. That's maybe for the future, so the rationale to keep going with our long-term time series. And that at different scales. That will be very important to keep our different networks covering the different scales. And to keep going with the standardized and well-documented time series, applying the FAIR principles. I think you all know what the FAIR principle is. And it's also important to keep going with the contribution to the landscape analysis that we have discussed also this morning, to highlight or emphasize, to facilitate the collaboration or cross-cutting issues with, for example, the other domain of the ESFRI, for example, health and food. Yeah, it's clearly natural that the environment is connected to health and food, because answering, as I said, the societal needs is only possible via collaboration in all the domains. And finally, the last question on how to involve stakeholders, how can collaboration be optimized? Maybe a kind of thinking may go in the direction of having appropriate governance to co-design services and prepare the international meetings, for example, the different COPs. I think we provide the essential climate variables, again. We probably need also higher collaboration between observation models and satellite community. So you remember my orange block in the center of our role. That's definitely an ongoing discussion between these three somewhat independent communities. for a common strategy towards the Copernicus services. And again, I would like to emphasize that we definitely need dedicated projects that we have from the Horizon Europe and the other programs. We have this dedicated project to start a new services, to start improving ourselves and start the collaboration. But again, what happens after the projects end? And that's probably for us the important discussion with stakeholders. How we maintain and find a sustainable solution regarding the staff in our research infrastructure. I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe if you allow me, I would have one question. Since we are in a smaller group, maybe we can be a little bit more interactive. Remain a little bit on your point 3. We have a reality which you described very well today, which is that we have the reality of the research infrastructures organized under the coordination of ESFRI and so on, and we have the landscape analysis, a starting point, and the roadmap and so on. On the other side, we have the space community that you mentioned before, and Copernicus, which is quite advanced in having developed user interaction, having organized their users, one thing. And the other thing is with an operational service delivery, which is funded by European Operational Program. And so how do you see this happening now in the context of ESFRI? Do you think that one should repeat what has already happened for space, or is it more about formalizing all the needs that happen in the Copernicus reality camps and so on, and just formalizing the contribution from the research infrastructure side and maybe recognizing this European dimension that it is necessary?
Well, I don't know exactly how the space community is organized, so I don't know. But for Copernicus, for example, we are on the in situ component, I would say. And it seems that it's a little bit out of the rest of the Copernicus services, because we are at the beginning of the chain. We are essential, but we are the first step at some point. So I don't know. Probably there is something to improve and to be maybe further involved in co-designing the services also with Copernicus, because we do our homework to provide the data, to provide the diagnostics and the knowledge to further improve the models. But then everything visible, it's like an iceberg. We see the top of the iceberg, but we are working on the 90%. Underneath the surface, and also in terms of users, we all are kind of evaluated by the number of users, and for us, observations, research infrastructure, Copernicus is counted as one user, but it doesn't reflect on any way the number of users from Copernicus, and without the in situ and all the informations, the models and all the services by Copernicus wouldn't be as good as they are. But so there is probably something to think about that. Yeah. It's yes, Copernicus is our very important user, but it counts only one in our evaluation. So.
I insist on this point on users, and maybe it can come back on panel 3, because one thing is to say, I have users, everybody has users, this is by definition, but then how we can have more structured user development to drive specific needs. This point was also mentioned at the plenary today with a specific example of industry. This is a challenge. Who are the users who should define, for example, the foresight part of the landscape analysis envisaged by David in his intervention this morning? Who are those? Are the thousands users, let's say, from different ENVRI, from the ENVRI community, or are there specific groups, mega groups, let's say, more core users that could drive the process? I mean, these are just questions for the reflection afterwards. I see that you already want to react.
Okay, quickly. I'm Nigel Mason. I represent Europlanet, one of the research infrastructures, the space research infrastructures. And although our particular interest is looking out, of course, space is very keen on looking down. Your point about industry, I think, there is a space industry in Europe, okay? And that space industry covers everything from building the instrumentation we're going to use for space missions, to launching rockets, to doing all the things for data analysis of Diaz flight. There is no single voice. And that's one of the biggest problems in trying to get industry to engage with research infrastructures. Industry is still surprisingly reluctant to participate in, and it's not just in European research infrastructure projects. I mean, the Commission has been pushing for 10 years to get more industrial use and training networks in Marie Curie. It's been trying to get more involvement in nanotechnology and everything else. It's quite hard. There are a few big companies, but the small SMEs are very hard to engage with, yet they are 90% of the users. Bureaucracy is one thing. You have to keep it very simple. I think
that's
one
the point
to the RI scheme is once it comes down to actually saying you've got some transnational excess, you can go and use this facility, we can make it very simple.
Yeah.
But working with one at the moment, we've got 3 MSMEs working on a European project. They drown in the paperwork, as you can see. They just do not have the people who understand, and every time you're a query back on the portal, we can't do this. We just haven't got the capacity to go back. So if the RI system, can they use our research infrastructures? Yes, but I think they often feel kind of nervousness of coming to them because they worry about the bureaucracy or they worry about the scheme. Mm-hmm. Even if you explain to many of them, it actually is free. You know, this is a free resource. The Commission has set this up. You can test your instance, you can do things. It's psychologically still quite good. Mm-hmm. The other thing is data. Anybody working in the area on remote sensing, there's an awful lot of data about many of the companies. There's a whole new market in actually exploiting data, remote sensing data. That doesn't always fit well with the desire for open access and everything else, because their life is actually taking that data, transforming it into something else and selling it. So how do we get around that problem? Free data, they do something with it, they want to sell it.
Yeah.
And that could be things like flood defense or anything else. That's their bit, and we don't really, they struggle to work with that bit of the thing.
Mm. Yeah. I think you wanted to raise a point, and then we can go to the next one.
How to involve stakeholders. I think you need to be more open and think about the unlikely stakeholders. And I talk about the social sciences again, but coming from the sciences, we see that, the social sciences, we see that our current data are not enough to understand public opinion, political behavior, and so on. So we start moving towards context data. And one thing, and one element that we do, and it relies to the FAIR principles, especially the interoperability, is we try to connect Copernicus data, for example, with surveys. And sometimes Copernicus data are not collected in the way that we would like them to, or we can use them, because we don't understand it, because it doesn't fit with the geographical units that we normally understand. So maybe what we need is to go a step deeper to the actual infrastructure that collect the data and start new cooperations to get more adaptable data. So maybe if you look at widening the spectrum of your stakeholders and include us.
It's definitely, really...
Data interoperability is the most important component that we have if, of course, we can trust the data quality.
It's a good comment. So, I just put an example for other domains that it's more natural, closer to our observations, but definitely social science or even energy, and we are all in the same planet anyway, and talking and also referring to this morning conversation on the trust in science. I think that's also definitely something maybe we can work in common, and we have to learn.
I think one component that is interesting for the Commission is the acceptance of climate change mitigation measures, and these are relevant. You can only capture them if you have context data.
And once again, I don't doubt that we can get dedicated projects to start a collaboration. But in 3 or 4 years after this project, what's going on? Who will pay?
Yeah, maybe
to
for
maintain
that.
this new service and this new collaboration.
So there are
That's
national
the key point.
infrastructures that you can convince that they can redirect their funding in keeping those kind of elements alive, and not necessarily have them on the European level, but maybe on the national.
Okay, we will be discussing these points later on. Maybe we can go to the next presentation by Fernando Diaz Lopez from the Climate Kick.
Okay, so if you want to know more. I let you.
Well, thank you very much to the organizers, and thank you very much to the wonderful panel that we have today, and thank you for making the time. After lunch, it's always tricky to have a session, and then we hope to move to the more conversation part in a minute. Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Before I start my intervention, I just want to know who of you are familiar with the model of KICS of EIT, with the knowledge and innovation communities? Okay, quite a few of you. All right. Obviously, maybe of you have heard that the EIT was created, or it was inspired by the MIT, and then something evolved along the lines of the working group, and then a European-based model of that created both a network and an agency in a dedicated topic was more adequate. So Climate Kick was set up, was one of the first wave of kicks together with digital and energy, if I recall correctly, that was established more than 10 years ago to gather the community around climate innovation, but also to basically work along pillars that were considered very important for the European research agenda. So to move from just doing research to really, create an entrepreneurial ecosystem across Europe, and education, entrepreneurship, and ecosystem building were very important elements. And all of those keywords are out there. But it wasn't until very recently, 3 years ago, that Climate Kick, realizing the size of the challenge that we have with climate change, and the urgent need to really mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change, and then to keep this 1.5 degrees Celsius target, is that we responded with an approach that has been very recently identified by a panel of independent experts, by an independent panel as a best practice internationally, as an international best practice, to this method that we have implemented on the ground to catalyze system change, which is called the deep demonstrations. So the deep demonstrations are basically test beds for trying to put together a number of stakeholders around a challenge, around a topic. It's territorially connected, it connects industry, it connects cities, it connects regions. And then we use a portfolio approach to research and innovation in order to create this, intervention logic that will put those stakeholders together, and that will eventually move along these pre-identified solutions that need to be championed and need to be really implemented on the ground. And this is based on an approach that is basically very, very much around common sense, by removing bottlenecks, by looking at levers of change, as we call it. And then through that, we look at how to change an industrial sector, value chains, or city region. Right now, in the context of the EU emissions, and that's something that it will be presented afterwards, this logic of large-scale demonstrations, that flagships, demonstrators, lighthouses, living labs, is very central to the topic of how research infrastructure becomes really relevant to address societal challenges. However, we basically are looking at a very urgent topic. Climate change is urgent, it's very complex, it's highly uncertain, it's highly unequal. You know, there are certain regions which are more vulnerable than others. Certain parts of society are much more at risk than others. And recent events that are happening in different parts of the world, in Pakistan, the floodings, and you know, this heat wave that we just face in Europe, are making the diversity of solutions that are needed to be implemented on the ground, at the scale, with the speed that we need it by 2030. It becomes quite a wicked problem. And at Climate Kick, obviously, we are a sort of a hybrid of a network of more than 400 entities, but the same the other kicks, focusing around the specific topics. You know, we are climate, but there is also raw materials, there is digital, there is manufacturing, so in areas where Europe can become a champion. And when we look at the different levels of change, you know, how we press those buttons, you know, and then we catalyze systemic transformations, because it's not about implementing silo solution. And then very much, you know, the example of right now of the previous research infrastructure, we said, well, you need to really have a holistic view of, if you are to collect the data about all of these atmospheric indicators, and obviously it becomes quite relevant to generate data, how you use the data, and you know how IP becomes, in some of the questions, you know, how IP becomes a barrier or a driver, you know, for certain stakeholders to say, well, yes, I mean, you probably have heard of the climate adaptation initiative of Microsoft, for example, or Google right now, really heavily invested in climate change from the data side. So data becomes very important, but at the same time, from this perspective, it is very important for decision making. You know, it's not only how you address the problem, but how you frame the solution. So in this approach of levers of change and trying to promote systemic transformations and the deep demonstration approach, we basically came to think of what is the level of influencing that, for example, in the context of today's discussion, research infrastructure can have. And then I can think of two examples of that I'm going to share with you very briefly. But what I've been telling you until now is that the scope and degree of change that we require to transform the unsustainable system that we live in, it's a fact that is slowing climate action. I mean, I was talking to one of the colleagues of the panel. If we ask someone in industry that has just established a new factory that is supposed to produce for the next 80 years at optimal scale, if you're asking them, oh, well, now you need to become circular, or now you need to become resilient, only if the insurers are telling them to do so, it's very difficult for them to change the business case or the business model, right? Because an investment has been made. And if you ask a number of industries, or if you ask to a number of society groups, they say, well, there is so much rounds of investment available to address, you know, what we can do today or in the next 5 years. And it is not that there is a lack, at least this is a very personal view, that it is not that there is a lack of research infrastructures. This initiative, this forum, is an example that, at least in Europe, in a coordinated way, this is a coordinated attempt to, on a number of topics, to use research infrastructures to become relevant, to become affordable, and to become usable. But there is this this issue of accessibility to research infrastructures. You know, there is a wonderful research infrastructure in the Netherlands for solar PV technologies, but it's actually Southern Europe that has the real life testing conditions, for example. Or there is a research infrastructure that is available at GRC, and they have a program for opening up their research infrastructure, the living labs, to whoever wants to go and entrepreneurs or stakeholder groups or whatever. And that's a fantastic way of doing it, but it's in ESFRI. And then if someone from Portugal wants to go there, then there is a issue of accessibility, you know, how you actually finance a startup to go and then be a resident in ESFRI, for example. So this is the issue of accessibility, affordability, and inclusiveness. For example, IP protection. There is a consortium in Belgium around green aromatics. And there is infrastructure built around it, but it's IP protected. There is, although it has been financed with public funding, is the never-ending question how you move to an open model of share results, for example. And then, but one of the keys, and this is why the deep demonstrations approach of climate key has become so relevant, is that when it becomes challenge-oriented, we can think of research infrastructures for chemicals, for space, but is that the challenge that we need to solve in climate action right now? No, we need to solve the challenge of adaptability to floodings. We have the challenge of heat waves. We have the challenge of forced migrations. We have challenges that require a different lens of how we frame research infrastructures. And building on the larger scale and Living Lab focus to address societal and mission-oriented challenges, it's, in my view, it's a way to go, it's a way forward, but is it within the scope we need? Everybody, and for many years I've been hearing in Europe that we are working on upscaling solutions. Upscaling, what that really means. But the challenge is that we need to move beyond status quo. And then this is where I'm going to share just 2 examples. You see there that there is a really nice diagram of a program that until last year Climate Kick was very successful implementing, and it's not because we are in the Natural Museum of Belgium, it's a very happy coincidence, but we actually ran a program of climate action, climate journeys with museums. The non-usual suspect, and it's very much analogous to research infrastructure, to all of the things that you've been discussing in your stakeholders meeting back in March, was it, and in the previous year. How you make existing infrastructure, in this case, a network of museums, part of the solution. Well, a natural history museum, what do we do? What we did is, basically, we created a program and we created a partnership with a network of museums to implement what we call climate journeys. One is the museums need to become climate ready, climate resilient, and the other one is that the services and activities of the museum would be targeting certain specific stakeholder groups. In this case, it was NGOs, a group of educations, etc., to actually have that neutral from a neutral point of view, to actually mobilize local climate action. And it was highly successful. And now it's what you see in the new European Bauhaus on these big boards at the European Commission right now, is really mobilizing with entrepreneurship content, etc. And you can see there that, well, we developed some guidelines, but we require a different type of thinking, systemic thinking. And the second one is, and in less than 1 minute, is this deep demonstrations approach. We are moving in Climate Key. We are developing this approach in many different parts of Europe, in cities, in regions, in value chains, and these are basically challenge-oriented, locally owned, whether it's a national government or whether it's an industry or whether it's a local government, and you remember that one of the levers of change of the approach of Climate Kick was research infrastructure. Remember one of the slides before? Well, we managed to bring together on the ground all the different stakeholders and define a problem, define a solution, and then we facilitate that portfolio of solutions. And this is obviously work in progress with different type of degrees, but we are really looking at creating this transformational power. And very often, research centers, universities, and large-scale research infrastructure become central for the demonstration of the business case or the public good situation of a challenge. and the solutions that are associated to that challenge. So in Ireland, for example, we are using a stakeholder advisory method and co-creation with citizens to define those solutions in the agri-food sector, because the climate is really threatening agricultural production in Ireland. In Slovenia is different. Just to tell you that obviously each
conclude?
yeah.
I apologize.
This is the last slide. So just to give you what I've been trying to tell you is that without the details, obviously this information you'll have it in your inbox, and I'm more than happy to exchange further. But what I'm trying to tell you is this is really an out-of-the-box logic for something that has been traditionally seen as purposely addressing a topic. So we are using this system thinking to promote at least what we think bring us closer to meeting the climate ambitions of Europe. Thank you very much for your time, and we pass on to...
Thank you very much, Fernando. And we will have the opportunity in the table discussion for the climate adaptation, maybe to deepen these practical examples of stakeholder involvement from the climate kick. And then now we pass to Johannes on the climate adaptation mission. Thank you.
Is it easy to find? Maybe not.
If I can profit from this small break to ask the speakers to be a little bit more succinct so as to have time for discussion at the tables.
Klumpers, yes, that's one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. Great. Good afternoon. It's fantastic to be in this meeting. As probably some of you know, I used to work with research infrastructures a couple of years back, and so I'm in DG, and was in DG Research in that time, so I'm now in Director General for Climate Action in the Commission, and I'm working with a mission on adaptation to climate change. But it feels like a little bit coming back into a kind of atmosphere I experienced before. Much of that atmosphere, unfortunately, was COVID-tainted, so I have seen many of you only on the screen, two-dimensional, unfortunately, and it's good to see you in 3 dimensions. The missions, they are a new feature of the European policy landscape. I am saying policy landscape. They are rooted, they are based, legally speaking, in Horizon Europe. That's the only commission or the only European law or European regulation that mentions the missions. But they have the ambition to go beyond the research. They are about implementation. They are about tackling challenges. And so they are supposed to build the bridge between the research and innovation and the users of that research and innovation. And the users, that is the real broad sense, that is the citizens actually ultimately, because what we are talking about with the missions is really about challenges that are challenges of all of us. There are 5 of those missions, one on cancer, and I'm not talking about that one, sorry. Then we have 4 other missions, and they are linked to each other. We in DG CLIMA, we call them Green Deal missions. I don't know whether RTD research actually does the same, but we call them Green Deal missions. So one on soil health, one on the health of oceans and surface waters, then one on climate neutral and smart cities, and one on adaptation to climate change. And that is the one I am working with, that last one. These missions, all 5 of the missions, have certain features in common, and one is that they all engage to somewhat, to a much more, to a higher extent with citizens, or require this to a higher extent from those projects that will become the portfolio of these missions. In our case, the adaptation to climate change, we are looking at regions and municipalities. And that is a little bit unusual in the Commission world, because at the European level we are anyway very far from municipalities. And as we just heard from our colleague here, SMEs, municipalities, they are afraid about the European Commission, at least about the bureaucracy that we create or that we perceive it is perceived, and maybe in many cases unfortunately true. So we do not have often direct contact with that level, and it's a challenge for us, and it's also a challenge for them, language-wise, but also in terms of administrative culture or what they're used to. So, but we are doing this for one particular purpose, namely that regions and municipalities are the ones that actually need to take the actions when it comes to adaptation to climate change. So when it comes to taking the actions that make us more resilient, that prepare us for the impacts of climate change. Because this mission is not about CO2 emissions, it is not about short-lived climate forces. I mean, those things are very important and they are described, and other parts in DG CLIMA are working with that all the time, but I'm coming in DG CLIMA from that very small part, which is the adaptation unit, and we are dealing with adaptation to climate change, meaning with adaptation to that situation, which is to those changes that are unavoidable, even if we were to succeed with 1.5, which we probably don't, but somewhere between 1.5 and something else. And there will be, even with 1.5, there will be things we have to adapt to. In agriculture, in housing, I mean, still today in Belgium, the normal standard flat has no sun protection from the outside, for example, because it was not so hot here in previous decades. So there are many examples in daily life. Many infrastructures, whether they are electricity production or telecommunications, they are in need of cooling, and that cooling creates problems. Absence of cooling during droughts like there was now, for example. So there are many elements of this. And this is what we are looking into, and this is why that mission addresses actually that level where these decisions, where these practical things need to take place. And when you look into the areas we are addressing with that mission, we are looking at, I mentioned critical infrastructure, so that is everything telecommunication, energy production, hospitals, roads, transport systems, and so on. And all of those need to take adaptation much more into account than what they do today. We are looking into land use and food systems, into water management, both too much water, too little water, so droughts and floodings. We're looking into health and well-being, health, both the direct impact of heat, but also indirect factors like vector-borne diseases and these kind of things. And in all of this, we are focusing a lot on nature-based solutions. They are not always the only solution, they are not always possible, but when they are possible, they are usually really good because they usually do not have any side effects. If you are able to retain more water by nature-based solutions, you are usually also helping biodiversity, for example, or clean air. So usually nature-based solutions have no negative effect whatsoever, maybe an economic effect negative, but not otherwise. So that's why we are favoring them. And we are looking, and that is very important for the research infrastructures, I think, is that knowledge and data part, and also the governance, engagement, behavioral change part. The knowledge and data part is a challenge in this mission because the climate modelers, they are extremely well organized for decades and even better every year with their data. It becomes more and more and more, the models become better and better and better. But we need to know what impacts the climate will exercise on the ground, in the cities, for the citizens. So we need to combine this climate model information with impact information, with what happens to infrastructures, what happens to railways, what happens to the water conducts, and so on. So the impact is what we need to define and what we need to monitor and what we need to be able to measure also. Losses, damages need to be able to be measured and monitored. And there are a lot of geographical information systems that do provide information on this, but they are not necessarily linked to the climate models nowadays. So there is also work to be done on that level. On the governance and behavioral change, citizens and how they interact with the administration is an very important, or the other way around. You can look at it from both sides. Because we need both a modern and a good administration to deal with adaptation to climate change, and we need willingness and contribution from the citizens. I was in an event where the mayor of Maribor was participating last week by the JRC here, and that mayor of Maribor said, why is it so important that you have the citizens participating? Because the citizens are the only stable factor that you have in a city. Every 4 years there are elections, every 4 years there's a new politician, every 4 years there's a new mayor, there's no stability whatsoever. So if you want that things continue in a city, then you need to have the citizens. And that was just one example. You need also to know what they want. You need to know what they know. You need to help work with them so that there's buy-in and that things continue. So these aspects are also addressed by the mission. And I think there is also infrastructures from the social science side that can probably contribute on that part. We are, because regions are not used to work with the research world in many cases, or they're not used to work with Horizon Europe, they engage quite often, some of them locally, with with the university that is in their city, or the University of Applied Sciences that is in there, or with schools and so on, but they are not used to work at the European level. So what we do is that we are also we developed a charter for regions that they can sign. They can say, we adhere to the principles of the mission. We confirm that it is important, we would like to work on this, and we would like to work with you. And these regions, many of them have never ever had any contact with a researcher whatsoever. So what we are trying to do with those regions that are signing the charter now, through a mission implementation platform, which will come into life in a couple of months, we will bring them together. We will try to bring them together. We will make them aware that there are researchers, innovators, knowledge providers that can actually maybe help them, that can maybe design also better adaptation solutions than maybe the most easiest ones or the ones they have already heard of. So that is a little bit the purpose, and we are having now, this was in June, these were the municipalities and regions that were of flagging interest. We have today much more than this, and we will make a second announcement on 29th of September at the RNI Days. We have basically now regions from every member state, except from Luxembourg, but from all others we have, including Malta. And we will work then with them, and this platform will animate that community of practice, will make webinars, workshops, brokerage events, and will help them, will advise them, but will also bring them together with researchers. That's, in a nutshell, the mission on adaptation to climate change.
Thank you, Johannes. So what I suggest is at the table on climate, you can discuss how actually research infrastructures can be concretely involved in this context. Now I turn to Rory and Evgeni with a plea to try to stick to a little bit less time in order to have a discussion. Thank you, and apologies for that.
Rory, you're the only IT person among us. You'll find it yourself.
There we go. Social scientists, you see, forefront of technology. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I'm Rory Fitzgerald. I'm Director of a Social Science Research Infrastructure. Not, of course, of all social science research infrastructures, one specific element of the social sciences, which is the social survey. The chance to engage with citizens to understand what they think, feel, and how they behave. And I think it follows on nicely from some of the points that Johannes just made, because of the importance of understanding where citizens are coming from and how they think and feel and behave. But we face a similar challenge to, I think, the one that Johannes mentioned. We are based upon country-level cross-national measurement every 2 years amongst the general population. So what we measure very well at the moment is national opinion on a range of different topics, from immigration to health to climate change and so forth. And I think one of the things I'm learning from this workshop is the need for infrastructures like ESS to consider a different, more versatile future as well, to try and perhaps, for example, be better able to answer some of the questions Johannes was mentioning at the regional level, for example, which at the moment ESS would be unfortunately pretty silent on. That said, a little bit of background. So we measure public opinion across most of the European Union and some countries outside of it every 2 years. High quality measurement, not a quick opinion poll, but considerable effort into conducting these face-to-face surveys with citizens. And the survey has taken place every 2 years since 2002. And the content of the questionnaire is very much bottom-up. It comes from the academic community. So we talked about who the users are that are shaping the infrastructure. For the ESS, it's the academic community. It's not us, it's not the European Commission, it's these academic users who originally came up with the idea for the ESS. And every 2 years, there is a competition for modules, and in 2014, the first time ESS included a module on public attitudes to climate change, energy security, and energy preferences. That was a 32-item module, which included things like beliefs in climate change, concerns about climate change, personal norms, efficacy, trust, and energy preferences. The module itself was developed by an academic, Walter Pettinger, at the University of Cardiff, and the data is freely available. Like all ESS data, it's made publicly available to anyone around the world to use for non-academic purposes. And since then, from 2022 onwards, there's been a smaller number of questions that will be included in each of the biennial rounds of the ESS. But it's very, very limited. It's a small number of items. It's not going to be sufficient to answer all of the concerns that are here. Now, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, ESS's most recent round of data collection was very delayed because it's based upon face-to-face surveys in people's homes. We have some initial data that's emerging, and here you can see from the first group of countries where data has been released, it was released in June, the proportion who say that how worried they are about climate change. And where you see the figures in the red boxes, that's the proportion increase compared to 2018 that say that they are now more worried. So we can see that worry about climate change is increasing, but still in all of these countries, over 50% of the population of that country are not very or extremely worried about climate change. So there's clearly a long way to go before we're going to be really able to engage citizens, not only to take action that they need to, but also to put the pressure on these ever-changing local governments that Johannes mentioned. You need citizen pressure, and I think at current levels there are still significant difficulties there with moving forward. This also shows perhaps some more positive signs. This is the proportion of people who say that climate change was caused by natural processes or both natural and human activity and others. And in most countries, France in particular, we see a big increase in those that are really focused on the fact that climate change is caused by human activity primarily. But still, we'll see when we have the rest of our data later this year, there are other countries where there's still not a majority of people who perhaps believe that. This one again, if I came back to see you next year in March, we have all of the data points here filled in with the comparisons, but you can see that there is an increase in those that saying they have a personal responsibility to reduce climate change. Again, this is something which clearly needs to improve for the future. More measurement is clearly needed. So that's some of our core data, but it's very much at the country level. We wouldn't, for example, be able to go down to the regional level that Johannes mentioned. But there is a new development for us, which is the first time we've worked with an infrastructure outside of the social sciences and humanities, and we're working in the IAGOS Cities project, the PAUL project that was mentioned at the beginning, where they are increasing the amount of measurement of carbon emissions in particular cities, and we are working with them in Paris and Munich. And it's the first time that ESS has measured something at the city level and not at the nation-state level. So we're looking to measure the attitudes and behaviours of those living in Paris and Munich questionnaire is under development. That said, I just want to give you a comparison of the different emphasis on measurement or resources that are going into measurement. In the IAGOS Cities project, they are looking to measure greenhouse gas emissions on a sort of daily, hourly basis. We will have 3 small surveys amongst citizens in those cities. There's not enough resources in the project, for example, to have individual level measurement on a more frequent basis, or to have passive measurement with individuals in those cities. So there's still a big difference in the emphasis that's been putting on citizens versus other types of measurement. So we're asked to take 5 minutes, so I'm hopefully on time. Just to really focus on a few key summaries and outlooks. We have data on climate change. There will be more, but it's still very, very limited. We've recently been piloting an online panel, which we would like to develop more for the future to allow more space, to allow more measurement at the national level, but it's still very much under development. I think it's something that would be really important for Europe to have, so that we have more frequent measurement, more regular measurement, and more space on this topic. We need better social science infrastructure to monitor and respond to things like the climate mission, and potentially also other EC priorities. At the moment, the European Commission, of course, it has the Eurobarometer, but it has very few other instruments that really enable it to measure citizen attitudes, behaviours in a really robust way. And I think this is something that would be good to develop more in the future. I mentioned the work with IAGOS. That clearly has potential, but in that project, only 4% of the budget was developed to measuring the public's input into the project. And I think that's something that needs to change for the future. So a regular probability-based panel for Europe, a really good instrument for the European Commission, not only on climate, but also on some of the other impacts that climate change might have, for example, on immigration, on health, is something that really is lacking. So I really hope that in the future we can look for new instruments that are not only at the national level and more frequent, but can also really drill down at the local level. And I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Rory. Now we pass to Evgeni. So after Evgeni's presentation, we will then split into tables, and Claudio will be informing us where to go. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Now I will try to squeeze my presentation into 2 minutes to fit the agenda. And what I will focus on is the industrial tech roadmaps. First of all, there is a team at DGRTD, and I'm part of this team that works on industrial tech roadmaps for about 2 years now. And this responds to the new European industrial strategy, which fits the agenda of the Green Deal. Primarily, this is because we need to meet Green Deal objectives, but it seems, and the key message from my presentation is that there is a R&I investment gap. If my team did not believe that the R&Is and technology infrastructures can play a role in fitting this, actually covering this gap, we wouldn't be here today. So it will be extremely helpful for us during the small panel that we will have, a dedicated panel, to discuss how the R&Is and other actors working with R&Is can contribute to developing better industrial roadmaps at the EU level. So what we focused on in the first low-carbon technology roadmap for the European research area is the low-carbon technologies and in energy-intensive industries. We covered scenarios for transition to climate neutrality and tools for leveraging R&I investments. We worked also on framework conditions like standardization, valorization, green patenting activity, and we provided analysis of existing public and private data, which was not easy to find. What we analyzed is practically we concluded that there is a quite widespread if you see the left-hand side, of energy-intensive industries across Europe, which means that there is a lot of potential for industrial decarbonization and application of EU policies on that. But we have an even distribution, if you see the right up hand side, an even distribution among member states. You have a concentration in 6 member states, which practically provide, like Germany, France, Netherlands, Poland, Spain, that provide 73% of the GDP, and in this respect also 67% of greenhouse gas emissions. So where the industry is strong, we do have an issue with greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, there is a concentration of greenhouse gas emissions in specific sectors like basic metals, chemical products, coke and refined petroleum products, and non-metallic mineral products between 23%, 16%. So we need to observe the opportunity to actually focus on technologies that can decarbonize these specific industries. We looked at several scenarios. One of them, which we liked, was the Capgemini report from 2020, where you see on the graph the commercialization aspect of TRL levels 9 to 10 is in the orange, where you have the potential to immediately replicate these new proposals for technologies to decarbonize by 2030. This is the biggest potential. Then the green trajectory is actually the TRL levels 4 to 8, which will commercialize after 2030. And then after 2040, you have the TRL levels 1 and 3, which will be able to be commercialized in 2040 to 2050 to meet the climate objectives. So we need to observe these trajectories. When we talk about specific technologies, our team of industry experts that we work with developed an analysis which actually provided a technological decarbonization pathway. So these are the key technologies for low carbon technologies, like electrification, use of green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, and several others, which we assessed as low to high TRL levels, and then in which specific sectors these technologies can be applied. Like, for example, the carbon capture and storage has the highest potential for cement industry, but also for chemicals, iron and steel. And based on this analysis, we developed this conclusion and actions that you find on this slide. And some of them ask for industry alliances, actions to establish community of practice to facilitate authorization of first-of-a-kind installations, but also we have actions that are important for the green patents, especially among small and medium-sized enterprises. And my final word is on the work we do now, and we have started engaging in the dialogue research infrastructures and technology infrastructures, not only member states and industry experts, for the Circular Industrial Technologies Roadmap. This is the second era roadmap, and it actually faces the same challenge. R&I investments are low. Identification of specific technologies are a priority for us. We have built understanding that these are on the right side, the Pros for Planet and other partnerships that are quite relevant for this roadmap. And we are building understanding of specific technologies and business models. This is different from the first roadmap. Business models which will improve the circularity in 3 specific sectors, which are resource intensive. This is the energy intensive, textile and construction, which are in the focus of our second roadmap. Thank you very much for your attention.